Thank you for being here. The UCCS Visiting Artists and Critics Series was founded in 2011 as a collaborative program of UCCS Galleries of Contemporary Art, also known as GOCA, and the Visual Art and Art History programs in the Visual and Performing Arts Department here at UCCS. Over the past decade, the series, which is co-produced by GOCA and the Visual Art and Art History programs, has invited artists and scholars to campus to present public lectures and meet undergraduate students in classes and workshop settings. Today's lecture is the second of what is now our 11th season of the series. And the series brings artists and critics with national and international reputations and significance to foster an understanding and an appreciation of contemporary art through dialogue and critical conversation. Tonight's lecture by Gregg Deal highlights a significant nationally recognized artist who we are so fortunate to have living here in the Pikes Peak region and exhibiting at the Ent Center for the Arts this fall. I have to say, when I started at the Ent Center in January and learned that Gregg was scheduled for an exhibition this fall, I immediately put it on my calendar. I've admired Gregg's work from afar for years, and to have the opportunity to spend more time with it up close on a daily basis in the gallery has been a real personal treat for me. And I'm excited to hear more about his work and what went into this exhibition during his remarks this evening. Before we get to Gregg, I want to introduce Daisy McGowan, who is the artistic director and curator of the Galleries of Contemporary Art. Daisy was the brainchild that brought this show into being, and we are so fortunate to have Daisy and her leadership and her artistic vision behind the Galleries of Contemporary Art. Please help me welcome Daisy McGowan.
Thank you so much, David. It is wonderful, as David said, to see everyone here tonight. We're honored to include Gregg Deal in this very important series and to have his work on view in the gallery and in the building throughout the fall semester. We first started talking about this exhibition and just the possibility of what we could do here in the galleries in 2018, which was the first year that the Ent Center had opened. And so not long after Gregg and his family had relocated to this area as well. It's so exciting to be here at this moment, to realize the exhibition, and to be welcoming Gregg in to give a lecture tonight. Before I formally introduce Gregg to all of you, I wanted to acknowledge my team that has worked so hard to put the exhibition together and all of the programs that we do here. Our team in the back, who's running the lighting and the sound for us tonight. My GOCA team, Lene Cravens, our exhibitions and events manager, and our wonderful UCCS students, who we truly could not do this without. I also want to acknowledge our Visiting Artists and Critics Series sponsors. We also could not do this without them. Our Redline Arts and Society grant is funding much of this project this fall. And the National Endowment for the Arts, the CU President's Fund for the Humanities, the B. Vredenberg Foundation, our UCCS Student Government Association, and of course the UCCS Visual and Performing Arts Department, with whom this is a collaboration. Thank you to all of those sponsors. Finally, I want to acknowledge our GOCA Donor Circle members. If you're a GOCA PAC member, could you please raise your hand so I can say thank you? Thanks so much. As I always share, we raise 100% of our program funds at GOCA, and so when I say this wouldn't be possible without your help, it is really true. And that funding goes to the creatives and artists we work with. We commit to funding 100% of the artists and creatives that we employ through our GOCA programs and contract. So we couldn't do it without you, so thank you so much. Now I get to introduce you to our featured artist. Gregg Deal is a multidisciplinary artist, activist, and self-described disruptor. He's a member of the Lake Paiute Tribe, and he lives and works in Payton, Colorado. Gregg studied painting at George Mason University, has exhibited extensively, and has his work in multiple public and private art collections. His art practice incorporates lifelong interests in punk music, street and graphic styles, comic books, and speculative fiction. Throughout his art, Gregg asserts that Native peoples and their cultures are still here, and that we are all standing on the homelands of past and future Indigenous generations. It is my distinct honor to welcome Gregg Deal to the stage. Please join me in giving him a warm up.
That's a much longer walk than I expected from the back. Hamu, nu Gregg Deal, mi na nia, nu kiui takara, nu kumu, nu naa, nu tabudu, numu gubutu yadawada, which is to say, hi, my name is Gregg Deal. I am a husband and a father and an artist. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some work and to also just really watch this entire thing come to fruition. As Daisy mentioned, we've been talking about this for a while, and the anticipation for being able to be in such a prestigious place as the GOCA in the Ent Center at UCCS is something that I've been looking forward to since I first saw the space. And so I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful that you guys are here. There's a lot to jump into. There's a lot of images that I want to show, so we're gonna just get right into it. Just so you guys know, I've been married for 23 and a half years. My wife and I, she looks exactly the same. This is about 50 pounds ago for me. We have 5 children, and this picture really embodies pretty much what our household looks like. We had 5 kids on purpose, is what I often tell people, because I think it's funny. But we have a more recent image. We don't get a lot of pictures together. In fact, oftentimes my wife or I are left out of the photographs, so we were able to get this photograph during this thing. What is Maddox doing? My hands are on Maddox. I don't know I'm just noticing the size of this. What is he doing? That's Maddox. Art is part of our entire household. My oldest, who's now 16, we went to the National Gallery because I wanted to get a picture of them in front of this gigantic painting in the National Gallery of Art. We lived in DC for almost 17 years, and if you have the opportunity, the National Gallery of Art is just this incredible space. But what I love is the juxtaposition between this for my firstborn and this for our last and final child, the caboose of our household, Holland, and what that looks like. All right, so there's a lot of work to get into, but I sort of want to give a preamble to the work so that you can sort of get a general idea on where these things come from and what they look like. Oops, that was not supposed to happen. There we go. Much of my work is dealing with the sort of juxtaposition of the how would I phrase that? The perception of our existence and not the reality of our existence. The juxtaposition between the caricature and the photograph and what that looks like. But also the very real reality. This was made in 2016, right around the same time as the Dakota Access Pipeline protests were going on. I called this piece the new normal because there was this actual process that people had to go through in covering their faces in order to protest so that they couldn't get picked up after the fact, which is just sort of the reality of the digital age that we live in. Creating a dialogue between imagery is something that is important, I think, and it's something that's obvious. It's some low-hanging fruit. And so creating work like this ends up being paramount to bringing forth the narrative that people are oftentimes not thinking about, that we are not these caricatures, but that we are actual human beings with feelings and traditions and thousands of years on these, our homelands. So I'm just wanted to share a couple of little paintings. Those are part of them. Print and design actually play a role in the work that I'm doing as well. While I was living in Washington, D.C., I was also participating in some of the efforts there dealing with the mascot issue. This idea of grown men in tights tackling each other, honoring the lives and traditions of Indigenous people just seemed so silly to me. So American genocide reconciled through football. And what's really interesting about this work is much of it is speaking with a collective voice. And in that time and place, really at the beginning of sort of my public career, was able to recognize that there is a shared experience of Native people. And it's pretty easy to articulate that through poster work, through works that say the things that need to be said with that collective voice, that these things could exist online or on the street through wheat paste campaigns or through stickers, and really taking things that are simple and poignant and being able to articulate it visually. You know, something like even going back to the football piece, you know, as that entire discussion about mascots and sports mascots that are using the imagery of Indigenous people, it really is just droning on as talking points on the news, on any news cycle, and it becomes tiresome. And then people start to zone out and they stop listening. To create a visual representation of those things end up playing a role in giving people an opportunity to see things from another perspective. And so much of my early work is dealing with this almost propagandist set of graphical work that speaks with a collective voice. This is a piece that's actually in the gallery, the colonialism spray can. There's actually a lot of education in this piece, so if you have the opportunity to look at it, you can actually read the warning symbol, which says, culturally and socially flammable, irritates languages, traditions, and self-worth, may cause death, contains manifest destiny. The only reason why I put this up is because yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day. But the statements that go along with these things end up being incredibly impactful, because it's not just about creating something that's graphically okay to look at, but it's also about being pithy in what you are presenting. And in presenting things that are going to give you as much information as possible with as little words as possible is something that's not terribly easy to do, but something that became important during this process. And representation matters. I made this in 2017. I was able to paint it on the side of the Red Line building, which is a contemporary art center in Denver. And it was meant to be something that was fairly innocuous, something that was approachable, something that anybody could connect with. There are elements here that are wholeheartedly Indigenous, but to an outside viewer may not be terribly obvious that it is. And so it gets to live in this duality of being approachable or accessible to people who are not Native while also representing Native people as a whole. And the last one of this group is something that I've been working on for the last several years. It is the intersection of pop culture and pop culture. Native people, our sort of relic existence is part of pop culture. And right or wrong, these people exist or have existed, have living relatives, but also play a role in being the beacon of what you understand a Native person being. So intersecting it with something that is driven in pop culture, in this case, David Bowie, Aladdin, Ziggy Stardust, all of the things, creates something that is recognizable and something that kind of looks cool. And I've been able to sort of create prints on this, and gives me an opportunity to create something that people can get, people can have, people can share, while also not compromising or necessarily hitting you over the head with a sledgehammer as some of the other work does. So a big part of my practice is actually performance, which doesn't seem obvious. To me, it's this incredible thing that I discovered on accident, because I took a performance art class in college, and it was by far the dumbest class I've ever taken. It was just, and not dumb like dumb, it was just, it was hokey, it was silly, and like there was a woman in there that was like, I think performance art is being a mime on the street, and I'm like, you're an annoying French clown, like that doesn't feel like performance art. But also, admittedly, who am I to say what performance art is and what it isn't? But in that class, I had the opportunity by the professor, the most meaningful thing that he did was introduce me to James Luna's work. James Luna is a Luiseño performance artist. Luiseño is near La Jolla, California. And he was the first Indigenous artist that I saw that was unapologetically Native, that he carried his nativeness in his work. It wasn't contrived. It was wholeheartedly who he is. His very first piece was, the piece that sort of landed him on the map was a piece called Artifact, where he put himself on display and museumized himself, which brings up a lot of questions about dioramas and about the way that museums sort of present Native people as this sort of caveman-like relic of the past, these backwards people that didn't progress forward, which of course perpetuates the misconceptions of our existence and dehumanizes those things. And I was so drawn to that. A year later, I had the opportunity to go to the Venice Biennale with James Luna under a mentorship program with the Smithsonian, who I just happened to be working with at the time. And working for the National Museum of American Indians and sort of being in the right place at the right time and being able to go to Venice, Italy, to this prestigious event with James Luna. And while I was there watching James, I was actually pulled into his performances, which was life-changing for me. So much so that when I came home, I told my wife, I'm not doing the right thing. I need to quit my job and I need to be an artist and do a thing. And after a brief heart attack, I'm sure, she said, okay, and supported it. Several years go by, a recession, and I managed to create my very first performance art piece called The Last American Indian on Earth, which is referenced in the show. The premise of it is that I'm wearing this outfit that looks like Native American regalia, but it is not. It is contrived. Everything I'm wearing is bought out of a store, assembled in China or Mexico, but it represents the misunderstanding of non-Native people in America and how they view Native people and how stifled that view is. That the headdress is quintessentially this image that exists to represent Native men, without taking into account that out of 577 tribes that are recognized by the federal government, that maybe a dozen wear headdresses, and yet this is the quintessential item that illustrates, articulates a Native man. This picture is not, set up. This actually happened. This family, I was in the sculpture garden at the Smithsonian, which is on the National Mall, and this family came and wanted to take a picture with me, and the father wanted to point to his Cleveland Indians hat in doing so. My wife took the picture. She was part of my team for this performance piece that I did for a year from 2013 to 2014. And it was really pointing out this glaring problem that Native people have been talking about for years and years and years, that most people said, you're just being too sensitive. This isn't really happening. And it's the idea that when you wear these things, that there is a romanticism, a fetishization that takes place in just real time, that is systemic for Americans. But I was also curious, how would this work? What would it look like if I was just picking out Fruit Loops or Lucky Charms in a grocery store, which any one of us could be doing on any given day, but the outfit changes the entire outcome of what's happening? And so this was the piece that sort of landed me on the map. And it's a piece that I love and hate. There's a whole experience with it. There's a video that's in the gallery, but is also accessible on my website, that would tell the entire story of this piece that I'm proud of, but also incredibly frustrated with. And so goes on this sort of performance aspect. For my work, performance art has never been something that I used to make money. I can make a painting, I can sell a painting, and make a living off of that. Performance art was just this thing that I could do where it was art for art's sake. I wasn't doing it because I was making money on it. And so there was this free aspect attached to it that gave me permission to pretty much do whatever I wanted. I had this piece that I did in 2016 at the Smithsonian for this large group show. And there was this group it was 40 plus artists from all over the world. It was incredibly diverse. And there was this artist, her name is Anita Yo Ali. And she has this piece called the Red Shador, and she's wearing a full Muslim covering, but of course it's caricaturized, it's covered in sequins, and she's a Cambodian, first generation Cambodian artist that is Muslim. In 2016, if you can imagine, there was a specific discussion politically that was happening by a specific candidate. I don't want to name any names, but the Muslim discussion was incredibly hot at that time in time and place. The Smithsonian became very concerned about her involvement in this and actually arrived at this place of saying that she could participate in performance art, but she wasn't allowed to speak. They put it in her contract. And likewise, the only other artist that was being given a hard time and ultimately being censored was me. So this exhibition, which was called, Crosslines? Culture Lab on Intersectionality. We decided privately, because we were having a shared experience of censorship by the Smithsonian, that we would intersect. And so we did. This piece we decided to call Existence as Protest. It lasted all of about 6 minutes before I was forcibly removed by the powers that be. But we have this incredible and, dare I say, beautiful image of a Muslim performance artist and a Native American performance artist standing surrounded by American flags. And I think it's pretty easy to read into what that could possibly mean. I'm very proud of this piece, and one day Anita and I think we'll finish what we started. And we become great friends as a result of this experience as well. But the performance work is so interesting to me because it can stand as anything and everything that you want it to be. This piece called Invisible Lost Movement, where I pulled in my oldest child, Sage, was about being informed by powwow culture, but removing elements of powwow culture from this and creating a viable piece of art. That viable piece of art is about how these things inform and how we can take a step back from the ceremonial or the sort of reverent perception of these things. If you've ever been to a powwow, you know that the outfits, the dance outfits, are very colorful, and it amplifies the movement. You're informed by the places that you are. You can hear the drum. There's an MC telling you who the drum is that's playing, and additionally telling you what the dance is and who the dancers are and what it means and how it works. And my idea was like, well, what if I removed all of those things? Sage and I danced quietly in this. We were wearing wireless headphones so we could hear the music and we could dance in sync, but nobody who was viewing could hear anything except the bells that were on my ankles and the aluminum cones that are part of Sage's jingle dress that they're wearing. And removing all of the color, even in sunlight, you can see that like it's hard to see all of the details. And it's a metaphor. We exist, but we don't exist. We're here, but we're not here. We're visible, but we're invisible. And all of this culminated into this little performance piece that I became very proud of, not only because Sage jumped in with me and just went full force. Like, they were so just nervous getting into it and then just owned the moment, and it was this incredible thing, and we were able to pull some good documentation from it like this. You can actually hear the performance in the gallery. There is a sound that's playing that is from that performance. You can hear me breathing. You can hear the bells that are jingling. You can hear Sage's dress. And all of those things are meant to be sort of informed by powwow, but it's not ceremony. It's a piece of art. Non-Native people have a really hard time understanding that, because we did a Q&A after this, and a lot of people were like, well, what does it mean when, like, you were moving and you were doing steps and then, like, you took an additional extra step, and what does that mean? And I said, that means that I don't have good rhythm and I lost my beat for a second. Sometimes things don't mean something sacred. Sometimes things just are the way they are. Sometimes the beadwork doesn't have anything sacred attached to it, but we simply want to look better than you, and we want to have the fanciness that goes along with that. And it's hard for people to understand that, but this piece, I think, was definitely playing a role in that. Murals, of course, play a big part in what I do. This one's downtown, Take Back the Power, and has been there for a couple of years now, and will be there until this building comes down. This one's up in Denver on the side of the Central Market, part of a whole series that I've been working on called The Others, which I'll get into in just a moment. This is at the Skylark Lounge, which is owned by Nathaniel Rateliff, and he asked me to do a mural on the side of the lounge, just right on Broadway. And I have this really cool night photograph that I took with my iPhone on a lift. I'm impressed that I took it with an iPhone too. So, and this brings us to the work that we're doing now. So I have a mixed mash of things from the show that opened a month before this one up in Redline, as well as the show here. And it's this idea of using different mediums and different surfaces to create something that is culturally relevant while also, hitting you a little bit. Everything from the Bowie piece to basket patterns in the lower middle, to the Dead Kennedys, Nazi punks, F off, and everything in between. And I love this idea, this intersection of culture with something that is also culture, that is relevant. To me, it was punk rock, which is very much about what this show was for. And so I was able to showcase this work. It's called The Others. And it's basically reappropriated comic book images from the 40s and 50s that are stereotypical, that are very much the natives are losing and the cowboys are winning. There's a white savior complex in this series that I was working with. But the illustrations are so broadly drawn that I could make your skin brown and make the hair a little longer, and ta-da, it's an Indian. And so I did just that. And what I did is I replaced the lyric or the dialogue with lyrics from old punk rock songs. This is from a Minutemen song called The Punchline. I believe when they found the body of General George A. Custer, quilled like a porcupine with Indian arrows, he didn't die with any honor, any dignity, or any valor. And it became this interesting process in finding lyrics that made sense to the Indigenous struggle, to the Native struggle. This is from a Descendants song called American, which is a Bush era song. That's American with an apostrophe M at the beginning. We flipped our finger to the King of England. We stole our country from the Indians. With God on our side and guns in our hands, we took it for our own. A nation dedicated to liberty, justice, and equality. And the native guy is saying to the colonists, does it look that way to you? It doesn't look that way to me. The sickest joke I know. These lyrics are not taken out of order. This is the actual lyrics from this song. And how incredible that intersection, that feeling of disenfranchisement, that realization that there's a problem, that there's something amiss where we live, where we are, that is articulated through this music, spoke to me when I was a kid, speaks to me now as a 40-something-year-old. This is, it says, I'm so bored of the USA. It's a Clash song. It's called I'm So Bored with the USA. I think this is a very funny song. I think this is a song that the lyrics have been attached to me because of this work, that how dare you say this? I didn't say it. The Clash did. So, and the last one, this one's actually a little more contemporary. This is from a band called the Interrupters. They're a ska sort of punk band that came out under the wings of Rancid on Hellcat Records. Make our home in this sacred ground. We've been here for years, solid in foundation, the blood, sweat, and tears. Raise your voice, stand side by side. We will sing forever. We don't have much, but we've got each other. So it's really interesting the way that these lyrics, the way that these things that just sort of exist in time can affect something so poignant, so simple, and so meaningful. The Interrupters are good friends of our family, and so they know about this and they're excited about this. They were aware that we were that I was doing the big mural downtown, that Sage is wearing an Interrupter shirt, and so there's this incredible little side story about how we know the Interrupters and how they were in town recently, and we were hanging out with them after the show in Denver. And I love that aspect of this because Sage is their favorite band, and so they get to benefit from that as well, which I think is super cool. You'll notice on these pieces the backgrounds, that there's this process of using basket patterns, abstraction, dripping. And this has been the process in coming to the realization of the work that's here. This idea that I could create something that is relevant to my community, relevant to the area that my community belongs in, these textile patterns that have existed for thousands of years, reimagined in new ways, in new places, amidst abstraction that I've been developing for years and years and years as background patterns to these other works that I've been creating. Even the portrait work, even the early work, you can see that there's this process. And honing that process, finding the chemicals in the paint and all the things that create this process that is exciting to me, and adding these patterns as they exist in it. In this work, it's called Never Forget. And Never Forget is not just about the abstraction. It's not just about the basket patterns. It's also about these images that have existed for 100 years, for 150 years. These illustrations that have come to define what you may think or know as being native. And in this case, they've been painted with a very, very flat matte black. So from certain angles, it might blend in, but from another angle, it pops out at you. That these things exist, even if you maybe can't see them that well. And the existence of those things have come to define who we are in your eyes. Again, going to that place of the perception of our existence and not the reality of our existence. And so this is meant to be in that space, as it's titled, Never Forget. Also a reference to 9/11. You know, the strange discussion that happens, that this awful event that happened in September 11th, 2001, and that we were in this place and in this time where it was so important that this enormous event took place that we never forget. That people now will say never forget, but in the same breath tell us to get over it. And it's meant to mirror that language specifically because history is important. The representation of us throughout history, the stories of us throughout history, the demise, the dehumanization, all the aspects of our existence on this continent in our interaction with colonialism and with the United States and with the federal government and with westward expansion all matter. It's all part of it. These two pieces are along the same lines, doing the same things. In fact, we walked into the gallery and the lights are off, and the figure that's actually in this piece that you can almost barely see on there is like, it jumps out at you. It's right there. In my work, there's this conceptual process as well. There are these things that I create that are meant to be utilitarian in process, but also something that makes sense, something that may be recognizable, essentially using these tools against you, these common tools. This is part of a series that I've been working on called the Indigenous Sign Initiative. There's phone numbers on them so people can call and complain and air their grievances. That's by design. There's a website that's been created, and these things are going to start popping up all along the Front Range. So when you see them, just wait. It'll be interesting to see how long they last, if they last at all. But it's also about looking at things like basket patterns, or something that I've already working on, and what other mediums could I create that in? And this is exciting for me because basket patterns have been around, these textile patterns have been around for thousands of years. And so the idea that I could put these things that have existed through such a long period of time into a new medium, into a two-dimensional medium, into something that glows, into something that is in a space that's unexpected while still maintaining the integrity of that shape and how it exists within certain spaces is really, really interesting to me. And it's meant to be unexpected. It's unexpected to me as well. I fully recognize that I have created these and that they're going to be hanging in my house soon. And I'm really excited about that because it is something different. It's something new, and it excites me. But it's also, these conceptual pieces are meant to be a little bit biting. This is called Vehicular Dream Catch. Who are all these white people driving around with dream catchers in their cars? You're supposed to be driving, not sleeping. Like, come on. But then it's also taking a look at something like this and being able to call it weapons of war. Beadworks that are in the places where the paint is supposed to exist. Eagle feathers hanging off of them as these sacred items. I don't think a lot of people understand, because so much of our existence is sort of rooted in the relic, that they don't realize how progressive of a people we are. Beadwork is not traditional. Beads came from Europe and from Asia, and they were used in trade when colonists came here. And Native people got a hold of them and said, this is interesting, and they made something beautiful out of it, as you can see, like with the handles and with the paint roller. And we decided that this is traditional, and it's become part of our traditional practice and part of our traditional thing. We are a progressive people. We will adapt. We will always adapt. And it's an important aspect culturally to who we are and to what we are. And so when somebody sees something like this and they're like, it's not traditional, who are you to say what is traditional and what isn't? And this has been also another important part of my practice. This piece is in the gallery. It is meant to bring about the sort of ridiculousness of how we are engaged. You don't look Indian enough. How much Indian are you? I mean, I'm part Cherokee. I definitely look more Indian than you do. Did you grow up on the reservation? Because you're not a real Indian if you don't grow up on the reservation. The most ridiculous part of that statement is everywhere in the United States is our homelands. So I grew up on native land, whether it was on the reservation or whether it was here or in Utah, where I actually grew up. This piece is about violence. This piece is about stereotype. The color chart, as it were, are filled with these little plastic cowboy and Indian characters that you just get out of those little plastic sets, same as like army men. And they're painted to be the same color as the image behind them. It's surrounded by whiteness, but there's also still basket patterns woven in. The horse hair that's on the bottom with the tassels has bullet casings built into it. There's bullet casings also built on the top, denoting the violence of these things, the lateral violence, the cultural violence, the historical violence. This piece is called "These Things Are the Space Where Spirits Get Eaten," which is in reference to a John Trudell quote, where he says, "Protect your spirit because you're in the space where spirits get eaten." This is about boarding schools. It's about the weaponization of tools and the weaponization of schools and the weaponization of education. I'll use big air quotes on education. The systemic process of taking children away from their homes, placing them into what were known then as boarding schools, and force assimilating them to, as they said, the quote was, kill the Indian, save the man. And to eliminate their hair, to eliminate their names, to eliminate their language, their knowledge of culture, and then to abuse them on top of that, to physically abuse them, to sexually abuse them, and sometimes even die. The first major government-sanctioned boarding school is in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And on the grounds of the Carlisle Indian School is 150 young bodies in a cemetery adjacent to the school. 14 of those headstones are labeled unknown. This is an incredibly dark period of history for Native people, and one that has affected all Native people to now. Half of my generation were not in boarding schools. The next generation, my children, don't have to deal with boarding schools, but we are still dealing with the ramifications of those boarding schools. Because it wasn't just a forced assimilation camp. It was also a space that broke up the family, so that there's generational trauma and there's the erasure of what a family is. How is a father supposed to act? How is a mother supposed to act? How are siblings supposed to act? And if all you receive is abuse for your entire life, well, the mother and father roles begin to become skewed, and it creates more trauma as people have children and they treat those children the same way that they were treated. These have been the problems of our communities, and we're coming out of them. We're coming out of them miraculously and beautifully as people are starting to realize what healthy families and what healthy individuals look like. And so we're in a resurgence of excitement at the moment, coming away from the boarding school process, but you cannot forget that these things happened. The chair is being used because something as simple as a chair was weaponized, forcing kids to sit in them to cut your hair, making kids sit in them to learn something that they weren't equipped to learn, to abuse them, to punish them, to do all of the things that were that were meant to be done in those spaces in these types of chairs. And on the chairs, this is from another exhibit, but it's the same piece. On those chairs are human hair braids. My hair was nice and long, and I cut it last October specifically for this piece. And my oldest son and my oldest daughter did the same thing. And I was able to, through another museum space as well as through here, create a simplified version of it, of a single chair with a braid on it. I love the simplicity of this. It's not just easy to move around and easy to build, but it's also something that is just so simple and still impactful in the same way. And so these things all sort of are in the same space. These artifacts, these ideas, these historical things that have existed through time that end up becoming these beacons of history that are disturbing and that are upsetting. These corpse tags are real, and they were tools that were used in placing bounties on the heads of Indigenous people during the expansion west. They're brass, which gives it a sense of permanence. They're labeled property of the U.S. government, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is part of the Department of the Interior, but in this time and place, it was actually part of the War Department. These things are part of my work because they're part of who I am. I don't know if anybody recognizes or understands how important knowing your history is to Native people. It is not uncommon for Native people to know all of the things, even children. I have some children that could probably take many of you to task in their knowledge of who they are, where they came from, why things are the way they are. But it's not set up that way because it's something that I want them to have. It's actually a tool of survival. Because it's not uncommon for a Native child to be sitting in a classroom in a history class and for a teacher to say something that is incorrect, and for that Native student to either recognize it, reel it, or even take that teacher to task, as my oldest child has done, which I find just amazing. But these things end up becoming a tool of survival. Could you imagine knowing where you stand amidst your peers, amidst your educators, your teachers, and realizing that you have to know this information so that you can protect yourself, so that you can walk away unscathed when somebody says something that maybe has a political or social bias, which is sort of the space we're in right now. And these things matter and become important. In my work, they're important because I don't want to forget these things. And maybe, just maybe, you see something as well. And maybe, just maybe, you won't forget it, that these things are here. Because now you have knowledge that maybe you didn't know before, and you are responsible for that knowledge. And that plays a role in all of these things. While simultaneously, I'm not creating work for you. I'm creating work for myself. I'm a contemporary artist. I'm speaking with my voice. I'm articulating it for myself in a way that makes the most sense. I'm speaking in a language that I understand. Hopefully you understand it as well. But it's okay if you don't. And it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to wonder about these things. And in fact, you can hate my work. You can love my work, but consider it. I don't really want to be in the middle. I'd rather be on one end or the other. But the thing is that contemporary art is this incredible space of freedom for Native people to be able to do and say what they've been wanting to do and say for 100 years, for 150 years. And it gives us the power to do those things. And you can see it happening in real time. Reservation Dogs TV show is articulating things that have never been articulated before in mass media. Rutherford Falls is doing the same thing while also simultaneously creating something that's approachable for non-Native people to be able to see and understand. There's books that are coming out. There's Native photographers taking pictures of Native people. There's Native designers creating Native design that's informed by Native people. There's Native art. There's Native music. All of these things are coming up. And what you're looking at is, my hope, is the beginning of a resurgence of Native people claiming their rightful place on their own homelands, where things have traditionally been pretty hostile. Thank you.